Okay, so k- get this. You sent over a ton of articles about Silicon Valley real estate and how it's like totally upside down.
Yeah.
Empty offices everywhere, but they're still building more and more.
Right.
What is going on?
So
Yeah, what's
strange.
the deal with that? And we're going to figure that all out using this episode of the Real Estate Edge podcast, which dives into this exact topic.
Yeah, it's really interesting, like, paradox, isn't it?
Totally.
It seems like Silicon Valley is in this weird kind of limbo.
Yeah. So the podcast starts off with this statistic that like blew my mind. Like
Mm.
almost 25% of office and lab spaces are just empty.
Wow.
1 in 4.
Yeah.
Like I knew there were vacancies, but that's a huge chunk of real estate.
Yeah, that's a massive jump from, pre-pandemic times.
Right.
Back in 2019, the office vacancy rate was just 8.6%.
Wow.
Now it's at a whopping 21.8%.
Wow.
And for labs, it's even higher at 24.6%.
Gosh.
So that really gives you a sense of just how much things have changed.
So is remote work the only reason, or is there something else going on?
Well, the podcast points to remote work as, a major driver,
Yeah.
especially in Silicon Valley.
Right?
Think about it. The cost of living there is astronomical.
Oh my gosh.
Traffic is a nightmare.
Yes.
So when the pandemic hit and everyone was forced to work remotely,
Yeah.
a lot of people realized, hey, I can actually be productive from home
Totally.
and avoid all of that hassle.
Yeah. Who wouldn't want to ditch that commute and save a ton of money on rent?
Exactly.
But are companies on board with this whole remote work thing?
It seems like they're starting to adapt.
Okay.
The return to office rate in Silicon Valley is only 40.7%,
Wow.
which is way lower than other major tech hubs.
Right.
Some companies are even downsizing their office spaces altogether.
Wow. So it's not just about empty buildings. It's actually changing the way companies think about work itself.
Right?
But here's what I don't get. If all this office space is sitting empty, why is construction still booming in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, that's where it gets interesting. The podcast actually breaks down the vacancy rates by a sector,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a huge difference between office lab spaces
Okay.
and industrial spaces.
Oh, right. You mentioned that industrial spaces have a much lower vacancy rate.
Exactly. It's only 4.7% for industrial spaces,
Wow.
which is incredibly low compared to the double-digit rates we're seeing for offices and labs.
So what's driving the demand for industrial space in a world where everyone seems to be working from their couch?
It's all about the rise of e-commerce
Okay.
and the need for faster, more efficient logistics.
Right.
Think about all those online orders we're placing.
Uh-huh.
Someone needs to store those goods, package them, and ship them out.
Right.
That's where industrial spaces come in.
Makes sense.
Warehouses, distribution centers, fulfillment centers, they're all in high demand right now.
So while some parts of the commercial real estate market are struggling, others are actually thriving.
Yeah.
It's like this weird tale of two cities happening within Silicon Valley itself.
Exactly. And that's what makes this situation so fascinating and complex.
You
Yeah.
know, it's not just a simple boom or bust.
Right.
It's a much more nuanced story with
Mhm.
different sectors experiencing very different realities.
This is definitely a good reminder to look beyond the headlines and understand the specifics of what's happening within different segments of the market.
For sure.
But let's go back to those empty offices for a second. What does this mean for the landlords who own these buildings? Are they freaking out?
Well, the podcast paints a pretty grim picture.
Oh, no.
They're definitely feeling the pressure.
Yeah, that.
Think about it. They're dealing with reduced rental income. They have to offer big concessions to attract tenants.
Right.
And they're facing the very real possibility that their properties are losing value.
That's got to be tough.
Yeah.
But as they say, one person's trash is another person's treasure, right? Could this be an opportunity for savvy investors to swoop in and get some deals?
That's exactly the perspective the podcast takes.
Okay.
They suggest that this could be a good time for investors to reposition assets.
Basically taking those underperforming properties and figuring out how to make them relevant and profitable again.
So how would that work in practice? What does repositioning actually look like?
The podcast gives a few examples. One idea is to convert those empty offices into labs,
Okay.
especially with the booming biotech sector in Silicon Valley.
Uh-huh.
Another option is to create co-working spaces that offer the flexibility and amenities remote workers are looking for.
Those are interesting ideas. So it's about adapting to the new realities of the market.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to hold on to the old ways of doing things, You've got to be creative and find ways to meet the evolving needs of businesses and workers.
Absolutely. And that's where those sector-specific insights become really important.
Okay.
We know that industrial spaces are doing well, but what about the nuances within office and lab spaces?
Yeah,
Are there certain types of offices that are more resilient than others?
that's a great question. Let's dig into those specifics a bit more and see what the podcast has to say.
Yeah, it seems like the days of those, massive perk-filled
Right.
Silicon Valley offices might be fading.
Yeah.
You know, the ones with the ping pong tables,
Yeah.
gourmet cafeterias, nap pods.
I remember reading about those, yeah.
It's funny how those over-the-top perks seem almost outdated now,
Yeah, totally.
like a relic of a bygone era.
Yeah, it's so interesting how those perks were, in a way, a response to that specific work culture.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
employees were expected to be at the office all the time.
Exactly.
So companies tried to create this home away from home environment
Yeah.
to make those long hours more bearable.
Right.
But the pandemic really flipped the script on that whole model.
Yeah, it really did.
Now employees are prioritizing flexibility, work-life balance,
Huh?
and the ability to work from anywhere.
That's right. And companies are realizing they need to adapt their real estate strategies to this new reality.
Yeah.
It's no longer just about providing a place to work.
Right.
It's about creating spaces that foster connection, collaboration,
Yeah.
and a sense of community,
Right.
even if people aren't physically present all the time.
So what does that look like in practice? Is this like the end of the traditional office as we know it?
Well, the podcast we're discussing doesn't necessarily predict the death of the office,
Okay.
but it does suggest a significant evolution.
Okay.
They hint at a future where physical spaces are less about, individual desks
Right.
and more about shared workspaces,
Yeah.
flexible layouts and amenities that support a more dynamic and fluid work style.
So instead of rows of cubicles, we might see more like open collaborative areas,
Yeah.
breakout rooms for focus work or team meetings,
Exactly.
and communal spaces for like socializing
Right.
and connecting with colleagues.
Yeah.
It's almost like the office becomes a hub for specific activities,
Huh?
rather than a place where you're chained to your desk for 8 hours a day.
Precisely. And technology plays a huge role in enabling this new model:
Of course.
high-speed internet,
Right.
seamless video conferencing, and tools that allow for seamless integration between remote and in-person participants.
Yeah.
Are all essential.
It's almost like the physical office becomes less about where you work
Yeah.
and more about why you come together.
That's a great way to put it.
It's a destination for connection and collaboration rather than just a place to punch in and out.
And I think this shift has implications that reach far beyond Silicon Valley real estate.
Okay.
It could have a major impact on urban planning
Okay.
and community development as a whole.
Okay, that's intriguing. How so?
Well, if people are no longer commuting to a central business district 5 days a week,
Right.
it changes the entire dynamic of city life.
Yeah.
Those downtown areas that were once bustling with office workers
Yeah.
might become quieter,
Okay.
while residential neighborhoods could see more activity during the day as people work from home.
It's like we're seeing a decentralization
Right.
of the traditional work hub
Yeah.
instead of everything revolving around a central office building. Activity is spreading out, creating new patterns and flows within cities.
Exactly. And this raises some really important questions
Yeah.
for urban planners.
Right.
How do you design cities that cater to this more distributed work model?
Wow.
How do you ensure that different neighborhoods have the amenities and infrastructure they need
Right.
to support a mix of residential and work life?
Those are some big questions, and I imagine there's no easy answer. It's probably going to require a lot of experimentation
Uh-huh.
and adaptation as cities and communities figure out how to navigate this new landscape.
Absolutely. It's a complex challenge, but it's also an exciting opportunity
Yeah.
to rethink the way we design and experience our urban environments.
So let's zoom back in on Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
We've talked about the challenges and the potential for adaptation, but what's the long-term outlook for the region's real estate market? Is Silicon Valley going to bounce back from this, or is this the beginning of the end?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There's
Yeah.
no easy answer.
Right.
But Silicon Valley has always been a place of incredible innovation and resilience.
Right.
They've weathered storms like the dot-com bust,
Yeah.
the Great Recession, and each time they've come out stronger on the other side.
So you're saying there's hope?
I think so, but this situation does feel different in some ways.
Okay.
The shift to remote work is a fundamental change.
Right.
And it's impacting how we work and where we choose to live.
Right.
It's definitely a pivotal moment for Silicon Valley real estate.
So is that ultimately Good news or bad news for the region?
It really depends on how well they adapt.
Okay.
On the one hand, if companies decide they don't need as much physical office space,
Yeah.
it could lead to a prolonged period of high vacancy rates and depressed property values.
Yeah, that wouldn't be great. But
Yes.
you're saying there's another side to this.
On the other hand, if Silicon Valley can successfully adapt to this new reality, they could actually emerge as a leader in this new era of work.
Yeah.
They have the potential to become a model for how to create vibrant, flexible, and connected work environments
Right.
that attract top talent and foster innovation.
I like that vision. Paint me a picture of what a thriving, adapted Silicon Valley might look like.
Imagine vibrant co-working spaces,
Right.
repurposed office buildings
Yeah.
that blend work residential and retail,
Oh.
and a focus on creating walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods
Right.
where people can live, work, and play.
Okay.
It's about creating a more balanced
Cool.
and integrated approach to urban life.
Okay, I'm getting those utopian vibes again. It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But how do we get from where we are now with all these empty offices and economic uncertainties to this vibrant future you're describing? What needs to happen?
It's going to take a multifaceted approach.
Okay.
First, we need to embrace flexibility and move beyond the idea that work has to happen
Uh-huh.
in a specific place at a specific time.
Okay.
We need to create spaces
Right.
that cater to the needs of a more distributed workforce.
So step one is to acknowledge that the old model is no longer the only option. Got it. What's next?
We need to think creatively about how to repurpose and revitalize those existing office spaces.
Okay.
Can they be converted into labs, co-working spaces, or residential units?
Okay.
Can we create mixed-use developments
Yeah.
that bring new energy and vibrancy to these areas?
It's about finding ways to make these spaces relevant and attractive again.
Exactly.
But you mentioned a third point earlier, something about community.
Yes, I think fostering a strong sense of community is going to be crucial in this new world of work.
Right.
If people are going to be working from home or in more distributed workspaces,
Right.
it's even more important to create opportunities
Yeah.
for connection, collaboration, and a sense of belonging.
So it's about making sure that even though work is becoming more decentralized,
Right.
people still feel connected to a larger community.
Yes.
Whether that's through shared workspaces,
Mhm.
neighborhood events, or online platforms.
Exactly.
It's about creating those opportunities for people to interact and build relationships.
That's right.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah.
And you've heard about the challenges facing Silicon Valley real estate and the potential opportunities emerging from this shift and, some key strategies for navigating this new landscape. But now I kind of want to bring it back to you. Like, what does all this mean for you, the listener? How can you apply these insights to your own life or work?
That's a great question. It really depends,
Yeah.
on your individual circumstances and goals. Are you an investor looking to capitalize on the shifting market, a business owner rethinking your real estate strategy, or maybe you're just someone who lives and works in Silicon Valley
Right.
trying to make sense of all this change?
Yeah, let's start with the investors out there. I imagine they're looking at this situation with a mix of, caution and excitement.
Absolutely.
Right.
There's definitely a sense of uncertainty in the air,
Yeah.
but that also creates opportunities for
Right.
those who are willing to take calculated risks.
Yeah.
If you can accurately identify the emerging trends and adapt your investment strategies accordingly, there could be some significant rewards.
So it's not about shying away from the challenges, but rather about understanding them, identifying the potential, and finding creative ways to turn those challenges into advantages.
Precisely. This is a market that rewards adaptability,
Okay.
innovation, and a willingness to embrace new approaches. The old playbooks might not work anymore, so you need to be willing to think outside the box.
Now, what about for someone who's not an investor but simply lives and works in Silicon Valley? How is this shift impacting their day-to-day life?
Well, one of the most immediate impacts is probably on their work routine and commute.
Yeah.
As we've discussed, the traditional daily commute to a central office is becoming less common.
Yeah.
Many people are working from home or choosing co-working spaces closer to their neighborhoods.
So they might be spending less time stuck in traffic, more time with their families, or they're able to structure their workday in a way that better suits their individual needs and preferences. It sounds like there could be some positive lifestyle changes stemming from this shift.
I think so, and this shift to more localized work patterns could also have interesting implications for local communities.
How so?
if people are spending more time in their neighborhoods.
Yeah.
It could lead to a resurgence of local businesses and a greater sense of community connection. Imagine a scenario where those empty office buildings are transformed into vibrant mixed-use developments
Okay. Yeah.
with housing shops and community
Right.
spaces that could bring new life and energy
Totally.
to areas that might have felt deserted during the workday.
It's fascinating to think about how this real estate shift could ripple outward, impacting not just the economy, but also the social fabric of these communities.
Absolutely.
We might see a redefinition of what it means to live and work in a place like Silicon Valley.
That's a great way to put it. We're witnessing a realignment of priorities and a reimagining of how work and life can integrate more seamlessly.
Right.
And as with any major societal shift,
Yeah.
there will be bumps along the way,
Right.
but there's also a sense of possibility and potential for positive change.
You've mentioned Silicon Valley's history of innovation and resilience.
Yeah.
Do you think those qualities will help them navigate this current transition?
Absolutely. Silicon Valley has always been a place that embraces change and pushes boundaries. They've faced down challenges in the past
Yeah.
and emerged stronger.
Right.
So I'm confident they'll find creative solutions to the issues they're facing. Now, the key is to stay adaptable, open to new ideas, and willing to experiment.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought. We've talked a lot about the physical transformation of Silicon Valley real estate, but what about the culture? How do you see the culture of Silicon Valley evolving in response to this shift?
That's a really interesting question. I think it's too early to say for sure how the culture will be reshaped, but we can already see some hints of what might be emerging.
Like what?
The traditional workaholic culture
Right.
that once defined Silicon Valley
Right.
might be giving way to a greater emphasis on work-life balance and well-being.
It makes sense if people are no longer tethered to a physical office.
Yeah.
They have more flexibility to create a work style that fits their individual needs and values.
Yeah.
We might see a more diverse and personalized work culture emerging,
Right.
one that's less about conforming to a single model and more about finding what works best for each individual and team.
Exactly. And as this new culture takes shape, it'll be interesting to see how it influences everything from company policies
Right.
to social interactions to the very identity of Silicon Valley itself.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but this conversation really feels like just the beginning. There's so much more to explore as this story continues to unfold.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Silicon Valley real estate. I hope you found it informative and insightful. Remember to stay curious, embrace change, and keep those great questions coming.